bar instead. I'm appalled. Do you know how many grams of fat, of sodium, are in the chocolate covering alone? I gasp, mock horrified. Come on, she says. You don't need to worry about that. No, you come on, I say, walking in front of her for a little while, so she won't sense any aggressiveness on my part. Listen, come by for a drink, and then we'll walk over to Dorsia, and I'll meet Robert, okay? I turn around, still walking, but backward now. Please? Patrick, she says, you're begging. I really want to show you that Durgan Gorham tea set. I pause. Please. I pause again. It cost me $3,500. She stops walking because I stop, looks down, and when she looks back up, her brow, both cheeks, are damp with a layer of perspiration, a fine sheen. She's hot. She sighs, smiling to herself. She looks at her watch. Well, I ask. If I did, she starts. Yes, I ask, stretching the word out. If I did, I have to make a phone call. No, negative, I say, waving down a cab. Call from my place. Patrick, she protests. There's a phone right over there. Let's go now, I say. There's a taxi. In the cab heading up toward the Upper West Side, she says, I shouldn't have had that wine. Are you drunk? No, she says, fanning herself with a playbill from Les Miserables someone left in the back seat of the cab, which isn't air-conditioned, and even with both windows open, she keeps fanning herself. Just slightly tipsy. We both laugh for no reason, and she leans into me, then realizes something and pulls back. You have a doorman, right? She asks, suspiciously. Yes. I smile, turned on by her unawareness of just how close to peril she really is. Inside my apartment, she moves into the living room area, nodding her head approvingly, murmuring, Very nice, Mr. Bateman, very nice. Meanwhile, I'm locking the door, making sure it's bolted shut. Then I move over to the bar and pour some J&B into a glass while she runs her hand over the Wurlitzer jukebox, inspecting it. I've started growling to myself, and my hands are shaking so badly I decide to forgo any ice. And then I'm in the living room, standing behind her while she looks up at the David Onica that's hung above the fireplace. She cocks her head, studying it. Then she starts giggling and looks at me, puzzled. Then back at the Onica, still laughing. I don't ask what's wrong, I could care less. Downing the drink in a single gulp, I move over to the Anaholian white oak armoire where I keep a brand-new nail gun I bought last week at a hardware store near my office in Wall Street. After I've slipped on a pair of black leather gloves, I make sure the nail gun is loaded. Patrick, Bethany asks, still giggling. Yes, I say. Then, darling, who hung the Onica? She asks. You like it? I ask. It's fine, but... She stops, then says, I'm pretty sure it's hung upside down. What? Who hung the Onica? I did, I say, my back still to her. You've hung the Onica upside down. She laughs. I'm standing at the armoire, squeezing the nail gun, getting used to its weight in my gloved fist. I can't believe it's upside down, she says. How long has it been this way? A millennium, I whisper, turning around, nearing her. What? She asks, still studying the Onica. I said, what in the fuck are you doing with Robert Hall? I whisper. What did you say? As if in slow motion, like in a movie, she turns around. I wait until she's seen the nail gun and the gloved hands to scream, What the fuck are you doing with Robert Hall? Perhaps on instinct, perhaps from memory, She makes a futile dash for the front door, crying out. Though the Chardonnay has dulled her reflexes, the Scotch I've drunk has sharpened mine, and effortlessly I'm leaping in front of her, blocking her escape, knocking her unconscious with 4 blows to the head from the nail gun. I drag her back into the living room, laying her across the floor over a white Volacutro cotton sheet. And then I stretch her arms out, placing her hands flat on thick wooden boards, palms up, and nail 3 fingers on each hand at random to the wood by their tips. This causes her to regain consciousness, and she starts screaming. After I've sprayed mace into her eyes, mouth, into her nostrils, I place a camel hair coat from Ralph Lauren over her head, which drowns out the screams, sort of. I keep shooting nails into her hands until they're both covered, nails bunched together, twisted over each other in places, making it impossible for her to try and sit up. I have to remove her shoes, which slightly disappoints me, but she's kicking at the floor violently, leaving black scuff marks on the stained white oak. During this period, I keep shouting, "You bitch!" And then my voice drops away to a heavy, raspy whisper, and into her ear I drool the line, "You fucking cunt." Finally, in agony, after I've taken the coat off her face, she starts pleading, or at least tries to, the adrenaline momentarily overpowering the pain. "Patrick, oh God, stop it, please. Oh God, stop hurting me." But typically the pain returns. It's too intense not to, and she passes out again and vomits while unconscious, and I have to hold her head up so she doesn't choke on it, and then I mace her again. The fingers I haven't nailed I try to bite off, almost succeeding on her left thumb, which I manage to chew all the flesh off of, leaving the bone exposed. And then I mace her, needlessly, once more. I place the camel hair coat back over her head, in case she wakes up screaming, then set up the Sony palm-sized handycam so I can film all of what follows. Once it's placed on its stand and running on automatic with a pair of scissors, I start to cut off her dress, and when I get up to her chest, I occasionally stab at her breasts, and accidentally, not really, slicing off one of her nipples through the bra. She starts screaming again once I've ripped her dress off, leaving Bethany in only her bra, its right cup darkened with blood, and her panties, which are soaked with urine, saving them for later. I lean in above her and shout over her screams, "Try to scream! Scream! Keep screaming!" I've opened all the windows and the door to my terrace, and when I stand over her, the mouth opens, and not even screams come out anymore. Just horrible, guttural, animal-like noises, sometimes interrupted by retching sounds. "Scream, honey," I urge. "Keep screaming." I lean down even closer, brushing her hair back. "No one cares. No one will help you." She tries to cut out again, but she's losing consciousness, and she's capable of only a weak moan. I take advantage of her helpless state, and removing my gloves, force her mouth open, and with the scissors cut out her tongue, which I pull easily from her mouth, and hold in the palm of my hand, warm and still bleeding, seeming so much smaller than in her mouth. And I throw it against the wall where it sticks for a moment, leaving a stain, before falling to the floor with a tiny wet slap. Blood gushes out of her mouth, and I have to hold her head so she won't choke. Then I fuck her in the mouth, and after I've ejaculated and pulled out, I mace her some more. Later, when she briefly regains consciousness, I put on a pork pie hat I was given by one of my girlfriend's freshman year at Harvard. "Remember this?" I shout, towering over her. "And look at this!" I scream triumphantly, holding up a cigar. "I still smoke cigars! Ha! See? A cigar!" I light it with steady, blood-stained fingers, and her face, pale to the point of blueness, keeps contracting, twitching with pain, her eyes, dull with horror, close, then open halfway, her life reduced to nightmare. "And another thing," I yell, pacing. "It's not Garrick Anderson either. The suit is by Armani." Giorgio Armani. I paused spitefully and leaning into her sneer. And you thought it was Henry Stewart. Jesus. I slap her hard across the face and hiss the words, dumb bitch, spraying her face with spit. But it's covered with so much mace that she probably can't even feel it. So I mace her again, and then I try to fuck her in the mouth once more, but I can't come, so I stop. Thursday. Later, the next night, in fact, 3 of us, Craig McDermott, Courtney, and myself, are in a cab heading toward Nell's and talking about Evian water. Courtney, in an Armani mink, has just admitted, giggling, that she uses Evian for ice cubes, which sparks a conversation about the differences in bottled water. And at Courtney's request, we each try to list as many brands as we can. Courtney starts, counting each name off on one of her fingers. Well, there's Sparkal, Perrier, San Pellegrino, Poland Spring, Calistoga. She stops, stuck, and looks over at McDermott for help. He sighs, then lists Canadian Spring, Canadian Calm, Montclair, which is also from Canada, Vittel from France, Croto, which is Italian. He stops and rubs his chin thoughtfully, thinking of one more, then announces it as if surprised. Elan. And though it seems he's on the verge of naming another one, Craig lapses into an unilluminating silence. Elan? Courtney asks. It's from Switzerland, he says. Oh, she says, then turns to me. It's your turn, Patrick. Staring out the window of the cab, lost in thought, the silence I'm causing fills me with a nameless dread. Numbly, by rote, I list the following. You forgot Alpenwasser, Down Under, Shot, which is from Lebanon, Cabal, and Cold Springs. I said that one already. Courtney cuts in, accusingly. No, I said. You said Poland Spring. Is that right? Courtney murmurs, then tugging at McDermott's overcoat. Is he right, Craig? Probably. McDermott shrugs. I guess. You must also remember that one should always buy mineral water in glass bottles. You shouldn't buy it in plastic ones. I say ominously, then wait for one of them to ask me why. Why? Courtney's voice is tinged with actual interest. Because it oxidizes, I explain. You want it to be crisp, with no aftertaste. After a long, confused, Courtney-like pause, McDermott admits, staring out the window. He's right. I don't really understand the differences in water, Courtney murmurs. She's sitting between McDermott and myself in the back of the cab, and under the mink has on a wool twill suit by Givenchy, tights by Calvin Klein, and shoes by Warren Susan Allen Edmonds. Earlier in the same cab, when I touched the mink suggestively, with no intent other than to check its quality, and she could sense this, Courtney quietly asked me if I had a breath mint. I said nothing. What do you mean? McDermott inquires solemnly. Well, she says, I mean, what's really the difference between something like spring water and natural water, for instance? Or, I mean, is there one? Courtney. Natural water is any water from an underground source. Craig sighs, still staring out the window. Mineral content hasn't been changed, although the water may have been disinfected or filtered. McDermott is wearing a wool tuxedo with notched lapels by Gianni Versace, and he reeks of Xerius. I momentarily break out of my conscious inertia to explain further. And in spring water, minerals have been added or removed, and it's usually filtered, not processed. I pause. 75% of all bottled water in America is actually spring water. I pause again, then ask the cab, did anyone know that? A long, soulless pause follows, and then Courtney asks another question, this one only half finished. The differences between distilled and purified water is... I'm not really listening to any of this conversation, not even to myself, because I'm thinking of ways to get rid of Bethany's body, or at least debating whether or not I should keep it in my apartment another day or so. If I decide to get rid of it tonight, I can easily stuff what's left of it into a hefty garbage bag and leave it in the stairwell. Or I can exert the extra effort and drag it into the street, leaving it with the rest of the trash on the curb. I could even take it to the apartment in Hell's Kitchen and pour lime over it, smoke a cigar, and watch it dissolve while listening to my Walkman. But I want to keep the men's bodies separate from the women's. And besides, I also want to watch Blood Hungry, the videotape I rented this afternoon. Its ad line reads, "Some clowns make you laugh, but Bobo will make you die, and then he'll eat your body." And a midnight trip to Hell's Kitchen, even without a stop at Bellevue's for a small bite to eat, wouldn't give me enough time. Bethany's bones and most of her intestines and flesh will probably get dumped into the incinerator down the hall from my apartment. Courtney, McDermott, and I have just left a Morgan Stanley party that took place near the seaport at the tip of Manhattan in a new club called Gold Card, which seemed like a vast city of its own, and where I ran into Walter Rhodes, total Canadian, whom I haven't seen since Exeter, and who also, like McDermott, reeked of Sirius. And I actually told him, "Listen, I'm trying to stay away from people. I'm avoiding even speaking to them." And then I asked to be excused. Only slightly stunned, Walter said, "Sure, I understand." I'm wearing a 6-button, double-breasted wool crepe tuxedo with pleated trousers and a silk gross-grain bow tie, all by Valentino. Louis Carruthers is in Atlanta for the week. I did a line of coke with Herbert Giddies at Gold Card, and before McDermott hailed this cab to head for Nell's, I took a halcyon to get rid of the edge from the cocaine, but it hasn't sunk in yet. Courtney seems attracted to McDermott, and since her ChemBank card wasn't functioning tonight, at least not at the automated teller we stopped at, the reason being she uses it too often to cut lines of coke with, though she would never admit to this. Cocaine residue has at various times fucked up my card also, and McDermott's was working. She bypassed mine in favor of his, which means, knowing Courtney, that she wants to fuck McDermott. But it really doesn't matter. Even though I'm more handsome than Craig, we both look pretty much the same. Talking animals were the topic of this morning's Patty Winter show. An octopus was floating in a makeshift aquarium with a microphone attached to one of its tentacles, and it kept asking, or so its trainer, who is positive that mollusks have vocal cords, assured us, for cheese. I watched, vaguely transfixed, until I started to sob. A beggar dressed as a Hawaiian frets over a garbage can on the darkened corner of 8th and 10th. With distilled or purified water, McDermott is saying, most of the minerals have been removed. The water has been boiled and the steam condensed into purified water. Whereas distilled water has a flat taste, and it's usually not for drinking. I find myself yawning. And mineral water? Courtney asks. It's not defined by the... McDermott and I start simultaneously. Go ahead, I say, yawning again, causing Courtney to yawn also. No, you go ahead, he says apathetically. It's not defined by the FDA, I tell her. It has no chemicals or salts or sugars or caffeine. And sparkling water gets its fizz from carbon dioxide, right? She asks. Yes. Both McDermott and I nod, staring straight ahead. I knew that, she says hesitantly, and by the tone of her voice I can sense without looking over that she probably smiles when she says this. But only by naturally sparkling water, I caution, because that means the carbon dioxide content is in the water at its source. Club soda and seltzer, for example, are artificially carbonated, McDermott explains. White Rock seltzer is an exception, I mention, nonplussed by McDermott's ridiculous incessant one-upmanship. Ramlosa sparkling mineral water is also very good. The cab is about to turn onto 14th Street, but maybe 4 or 5 limousines are trying to make the same right, so we miss the light. I curse the driver, but an old Motown song from the 60s, maybe it's the Supremes, plays muted up front, the sound blocked by the fiberglass partition. I try to open it, but it's locked and won't slide across. Courtney asks, "What kind should you drink after exercising?" "Well," I sigh, "whatever it is, it should be really cold." "Because?" she asks. "Because it's absorbed faster than if it was at room temperature." Absently, I check my Rolex. "It should probably be water, Evian, but not in plastic." "My trainer says Gatorade's okay," McDermott counters. "But don't you think water is the best fluid replacer since it enters the bloodstream faster than any other liquid?" I can't help but add, "Buddy." I check my watch again. If I have one J&B on the rocks at Nell's, I can make it home in time to watch all of Blood Hungry by 2. Again, it's silent in the cab, which moves steadily forward toward the crowd outside the club, the limousines dropping off passengers, then moving on, each of us concentrating on that, and also on the sky above the city, which is heavy, looming with dark clouds. The limousines keep blaring their horns at each other, solving nothing. My throat, because of the coke I did with Giddy's, feels parched, and I swallow, trying to wet it. Posters for a sale at Crabtree and Evelyn line the boarded windows of abandoned tenement buildings on the other side of the street. Spell mogul, Bateman. How do you spell mogul? M-O-G-U-L. Mogul. Mogul. Ice, ghosts, aliens. I don't like Evian, McDermott says somewhat sadly. It's too sweet. He looks so miserable when he admits this that it moves me to agree. Glancing over at him in the darkness of the cab, realizing he's probably going to end up in bed with Courtney tonight, I feel an instantaneous moment of pity for him. "Yes, McDermott," I say slowly. "Evian is too sweet." Earlier, there was so much of Bethany's blood pooled on the floor that I could make out my reflection in it while I reached for one of my cordless phones, and I watched myself make a haircut appointment at Gio's. Courtney breaks my trance by admitting, "I was afraid to try Pellegrino for the first time." She looks over at me nervously, expecting me to, what, agree? Then at McDermott, who offers her a wan, tight smile. "But once I did, it was fine." How courageous, I murmur, yawning again, the cab inching its way toward Nell's, then raising my voice. "Listen, does anyone know of a device you can hook up to your phone to simulate the call waiting sound?" Back at my place, I stand over Bethany's body, sipping a drink contemplatively, studying its condition. Both eyelids are open halfway, and her lower teeth look as if they're jutting out since her lips have been torn, actually bitten off. Earlier in the day, I had sawed off her left arm, which is what finally killed her, and right now I pick it up, holding it by the bone that protrudes from where her hand used to be. I have no idea where it is now. The freezer? The closet? Clenching it in my fist like a pipe, flesh and muscle still clinging to it, though a lot of it has been hacked or gnawed off. And I bring it down on her head. It takes very few blows, 5 or 6 at most, to smash her jaw open completely, and only 2 more for her face to cave in on itself. Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston burst onto the music scene in 1985 with her self-titled LP, which had 4 number-1 hit singles on it, including The Greatest Love of All, You Give Good Love, and Saving All My Love for You. Plus, it won a Grammy Award for Best Pop Vocal Performance by a Female and 2 American Music Awards, one for Best Rhythm and Blues Single and another for Best Rhythm and Blues Video. She was also cited as Best New Artist of the Year by Billboard and by Rolling Stone magazine. With all this hype, one might expect the album to be an anticlimactic, lackluster affair, but the surprise is that Whitney Houston, Arista, is one of the warmest, most complex, and altogether satisfying rhythm and blues records of the decade, and Whitney herself has a voice that defies belief. From the elegant, beautiful photo of her on the cover of the album, in a gown by Giovanni de Mora, and its fairly sexy counterpart on the back, in a bathing suit by Norma Kamali, one knows that this isn't going to be a blandly professional affair. The record is smooth, but intense, and Whitney's voice leaps across so many boundaries and is so versatile, though she's mainly a jazz singer, that it's hard to take in the album on a first listening. But you won't want to. You'll want to savor it over many. It opens with You Give Good Love and Thinking About You, both produced and arranged by Kashif, and they emanate warm, lush jazz arrangements, but with a contemporary synthesized beat. And though they're both really good songs, the album doesn't get kicking until Someone for Me, which was produced by Jermaine Jackson, where Whitney sings longingly against a jazz disco background, and the difference between her longing and the sprightliness of the song is very moving. The ballad Saving All My Love for You is the sexiest, most romantic song on the record. It also has a killer saxophone solo by Tom Scott, and one can hear the influences of 60s girl group pop in it. It was co-written by Jerry Goffin, but the 60s girl groups were never this emotional or sexy, or as well produced, as this song is. Nobody Loves Me Like You Do is a glorious duet with Jermaine Jackson, who also produced it, and just one example of how sophisticated lyrically this album is. The last thing it suffers from is a paucity of decent lyrics, which is what usually happens when a singer doesn't write her own material and has to have a producer choose it.